All right, guys, I'm Nicolette, and today Brian and I are here with Matt Jackson. He is the VP of Consulting over at Insight Enterprises. And today we're going to talk a little bit about digital innovation, IT. We're going to learn a little bit about a recent report the company put out, and we're going to talk about 2022, which by the time you're watching this is right about now. So let's see what the year ahead has in store. Thank you for joining us, Matt. We really appreciate your time.
Yeah, happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
So why don't you kick us off by giving us a little bit of background about you, about the company Insight Enterprises, what you guys are working on, your story. To give us the 411.
Yeah, absolutely, happy to. So I started my career as a software developer, so a geek writing code, and I've always loved to build things and loved computer science and seeing my code turn into applications. And went into consulting because I loved the pace of change. So, when you're in consulting, clients are always hiring you to solve their hardest challenge, right? They're not hiring you because, it's something that's 10-year-old technology. It's typically the latest and greatest. And so just gave me exposure early in my career to a lot of different companies, a lot of different challenges that they faced and emerging technology. So kept me sharp and kept me interested. As I grew my career, I got more into kind of building the business of consulting. Had the opportunity to start a company about 10 years ago, focused on software consulting, largely in enterprise space. So think, financial services, trading applications, healthcare, patient management systems, insurance, manufacturing. And so, big meaty applications that needed, at that time, this was about 10 years ago, just starting the transformation to the cloud. And so really interesting time to start a company coming out of that Great Recession. There was a lot of pent up demand for investment. And then about 5-6 years ago, my company was acquired by Insight. And so Insight is a historically large software reselling company, really helps clients optimize their spend on technology. But they at the time, but we now, we're going through a transformation internally to really become more of a digital transformation specialist for our clients. So not just helping them kind of choose technology, but really helping them set their vision for how to best leverage it, how to map it to specific outcomes within their organizations, and ultimately, how and I do this through our consulting organization today, really partnering with them to go through that journey. So helping them define what products and services they need to modernize, picking the technology that's best to serve that purpose, but then really helping them through the organizational change as well, so that they can adopt and successfully, realize the benefits of whatever investment they've made. And so that's really Insight's mission today. We're a global solutions integrator, so we help clients across the globe, kind of understand where they need to invest in technology, how they transform their organizations. And then I like to think of us as the general contractor. We can bring in both our own expertise, but then we've got 3,500 different partners that we can bring in to help implement these solutions.
Right. Now, recently you guys released annual technology report, right, in partnership with IDG. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so this is something fun we've been doing. I can't commit, but at least 5 years, probably even before my time at Insight. And it's great because it's more of a checkpoint every year. We survey about 400 different kind of corporate to enterprise clients, just to understand the state of technology within their organizations. And so for years we called it the ITI, the Intelligent Technology Index. It's more of a report, so we changed the branding a little bit because it goes a little bit deeper than just an index implies just kind of some metrics, but it tries to really dig under the covers into what our clients are facing. And so I like it because I'm often in front of clients and they look to us to kind of understand, well, what's happening, right? What are the trends? What are other companies doing? I mean, that's the benefit of being in consulting, is that we work with hundreds or thousands of different clients. And so we kind of know what's happening. And so a lot of our clients look to us to just find out, hey, what's happening in our competitor space and our peer space. And so this intelligent technology report is kind of a baseline where they can look and say, okay, this is what's happening. This is what I should be focused on because this is what my peers and my competitors are focused on.
Was there anything that really stood out to you in that report? I mean, in terms of where IT is putting their money these days?
Yeah, it's interesting. And so I think any of us that have been in this industry for a couple decades know that there's these kind of like great arcs. I came in right before the tech bubble burst. So I came in at like the rocket ship ride, and then it all crashed, and then it got better, and then it crashed, and then it got better, and then there was the Great Recession. And so I think with the pandemic, it's been interesting to see over the past 2 or 3 years how this has evolved. And so if you look back 2 years kind of to this report, it was all about innovation. It was about emerging technologies. It was about, how do I be the catalyst and not be disrupted by somebody else, right? Like how, from an organizational standpoint, everybody was thinking about the next big thing. And then the pandemic hit, right? And everybody's focus turned on to remote work, improving operations, cutting spend, building a more resilient organization. And so this year we were curious to see, like, have people started to look forward, like the pandemic itself, like I think we all thought would be out of it by now. And so we're kind of still stuck here in it. And so that was reflected in the results. So when I looked at the results, first of all, we looked at like what are the business drivers behind IT investment? So there's one thing to talk about cool technology, and I'm happy to do that, but really like what's driving investment, and both through conversations I've had with clients as well as through this report, what I'm hearing is basically that, hey, everybody kind of pivoted, did a 180, 22 months ago, to support a remote workforce, to support, potentially, losses in talent, as people either then they probably had to do layoffs, now they're struggling to hire people. And so what we're finding is people are accepting that that's permanent now. So before they might have said, okay, well, how do we open up a hole in, or how do we create some VPN solution to get access? I talked to a CTO of a large healthcare provider, and they said, yeah, a couple of years ago, we just said, hey, here are the instructions to VPN. And that was how you got into the, medical records for patients, which even then was kind of risky. Like most of that stuff you couldn't access remotely. And now they're saying, yeah, now it's permanent, right? That's not good enough. We need to think about, how are we moving our infrastructure to be native in the cloud, right? How are we making sure that people can access this information securely so they can be efficient from home, because they're just not coming back. I mean, if you're in front of a patient, sure, you have to be there, but there's so much telehealth and remote services as well, and extend that to every other industry, right? And so what we're finding is the things that we thought were, the priorities a couple of years ago are still the priorities, but now there's a lot more investment in making them real. I thought one of the interesting thing was, I was talking again, the same CTO from a healthcare provider, and I thought we'd be talking about patient systems, data and AI. They were like, can we just talk about the network? Right? Like the network is the number one thing for me, because I need to make all of these applications available to people at home efficiently and securely. And so that's kind of the theme we'll probably talk about, like at the top of everybody's list, is how can I do everything securely? And so that's it. So it's a lot of just, making operations more efficient, supporting flexible work environments, innovating remotely, like figuring out how do we innovate like with everybody all over the place. And then, just retention, keeping people. And so the stuff, it's not the kind of cool, innovative stuff. I mean, it is. Right. It's kind of nuts and bolts stuff.
Did you find a lot of people, because at the beginning, like you saw a lot of this, like people were just slapping stuff together, right? Because they didn't know, like, especially organizations that were told had no remote. They were just slapping things together, like, and they were like, "Oh, look, we made this portal," and it was just like literally like a web link, which is various links to other stuff. It was like that's not a portal. It's not like single sign-on, or it's not. There's no security in that. How bad was it? Like when people started first putting stuff together?
Well, it's interesting because I think there were some companies that were scrambling, like you said, just slapping it together. I think what I saw more, maybe this is because I spend more time in the enterprise space, is that companies had largely invested in Teams and Slack and Zoom and these things, and we just saw an explosion of usage. Now that had its own problems, and like I talked about security and things like that. But what we found was there wasn't any long-term thinking about what the impact was going to be to the organization. So how do people still collaborate? I mean, I don't know about you guys, but like I am totally over the Friday afternoon happy hour on Teams or something. I never want to do that again. I want to fly somewhere, and I want to get together with my team, and I want to have fun, right? And that's why people are leaving, right? Not necessarily like Insight, but just in general, people are leaving because they're sick of this detachment, right? That we get so much energy out of human interaction, and so people slap things together. But then I think people also thought like, okay, that's good enough. Now we're remote, and now we can make this happen. Right. And they're starting to realize that like it's not good enough, or the expectations we set then, really are having repercussions today, either in productivity or really like culture, morale. And so those are the things people are starting to think about it as well.
I was thinking about something you said about the company you were referring to before in that example, about how originally they would have been thinking about, AI and patients data and portals and things, but now they were just like, okay, let's talk about the network. And I'm wondering, like, how many companies are so set back? And I mean, obviously things were delayed and there's going to be setbacks because of, what has gone on over the past 2 years, but will they return back to where they were in terms of thinking innovatively again, and not just trying to figure out how to, be efficient with daily operations?
Yeah. What's interesting. So I'll go back to the Intelligent Technology Report. So what we did is we asked them, what are your top areas of investment in the next 12 months? And then the next question is, what do you anticipate your top areas of investment will be in 3 years? And so the top 12 months, number one was security, right? Kind of obvious.
Mm-hmm.
But after that was all kind of infrastructure. It was IaaS and PaaS. So how do we maybe move past lift and shift and get more cloud native through platform as a service? Data analytics and BI were there. So not like AI, but BI, meaning, hey, we have all this data. We need to make better like operational decisions. I need access to it. I need more reports.
Wow, that's interesting.
I talked about kind of the networking infrastructure, some IoT type stuff. So definitely connecting out to devices. So that's the 12-month vision, right? And it kind of makes sense. It's what we just talked about.
Right.
But when you look 3 years out, it changes pretty dramatically with one exception. So number one by a mile is still security. So they anticipate the security issues today. In 3 years, they're still going to be their number one. And I can't speak to all the clients we're working with. There was another big, a security event over the last week with the Java framework, right? Every week there's a new thing coming out that we have to get on top of. I don't think people see that changing. But then right after that, instead of talking about infrastructure and kind of productivity, it is AI and machine learning, right? It's high performance computing. It's digital workplace. It's intelligent edge type solutions. So basically moving cognitive services and compute to the edge, not just connecting and getting data from the edge. Okay. And so you do see that there's anticipation that we're going to get back to innovating, developing new products and services on these innovative technologies. Now, 3 years is a long way away, and a lot of things could change. But what I am finding, we do a quarterly CXO forum. So a lot of, say, CIOs and CTOs from across industries, and we do a monthly forum, and I hosted it last week. And the topic was digital transformation. So one of the questions was, okay, well, how many of you are still, I actually used this study and said, hey, this is what we're seeing broadly. And now it might have been the nature of that group. These are innovative, technology leaders. They've already started to bend the curve. Like they're moving toward this. So they talked about AI-enabled applications. So how do we start to take either cognitive services like voice or vision and improve our customer experience? Especially as customers are shopping online more. Or how do we turn that internally and look at like big enterprise systems, and how do we like maybe incorporate machine learning and AI to get smarter about predictive staffing? Like that doesn't sound too exciting, but when most of our biggest expense in enterprises is teams and labor and salary, if we can get smarter about staffing, whether you're a hospital or a retail environment, having the right people at the right time, because you can actually predict need up to a month in advance, like that's pretty innovative stuff. Right. And so that's what they're starting to look at now.
So do you see, so you talked about AI and, we're talking about medical. Do you see them actually approaching, we see some AI now bleeding into medical and doing analyzation of patient, illnesses, let's say, or whatever the case is. Sure. Do you see some of that in that technology report where they're going to use AI to replace some of the shortages that are going on in whatever industry it is? I'm just using medical as the example, but.
Well, so we have a good public case study with Steward Healthcare. This is a couple years old, but we've continued to work with them. They're a really innovative healthcare provider, and they've actually grown. We started working with them. They managed 8 hospitals, and now it's over 30. And so that staffing example was actually our first one. I remember sitting with their CEO, a brilliant guy. He's a medical doctor, as well as he's got like a master's in engineering and an MBA. And he's like, I think there's a better way to do this. It's like, if we can cut down on the length of stay. So length of stay is a big metric within healthcare. So if we can basically anticipate when somebody comes into the hospital and they first present either to a nurse or a doctor, and they gather the facts and they kind of come up with their initial diagnosis. If we can understand what their predicted length of stay in the hospital is going to be, then we could introduce interventions to reduce it. And if we're able to reduce, they actually calculated for every hour, so you think you go into a hospital, for every hour on average across all the patients that they can reduce, they estimated that across their 8 hospitals, they could save $10 million a year in labor costs. Wow. So now imagine that across 32.
Right.
So we built this huge model that basically looked at, I think, 18 different data sets. Everything from, the normal stuff like history of how long people stayed based on diagnosis, as well as things like, in the areas around the hospitals, Like, are there other, like, they have a lot of hospitals, they manage hospitals near like Fenway Park, right? When there's activities, when there's big social activities, do the numbers go up? So, do people stay in the hospital longer, based on, like, I'll give you one of the best examples. Somebody comes into the hospital and they're, I forget what the actual age is. I think it was over the age of 70. So if they're over the age of 70, there's one data point that basically impacts their length of stay by 100%. So if they have a driver's license, their average length of stay is half as long as if they don't have a driver's license.
That's cool.
Because someone's going to come, because they're going to drive themselves out of there.
Well, they're going to drive themselves, but also you think.
But it means that they're active, right?
They're active. The last thing.
I was just messing around.
No, but the last place in the world you want to be is a hospital.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. But if you're not mobile and you can't get around, then, I mean, there's people to talk to. There's food. Like, there's incentive to stay, to drag it out.
Right.
So you go to the hospital now, and that's one of the first questions they ask. Okay, how did you get here? Do you have a driver's license? And if you don't, then they put you on the fast track. Like, you get to the front of the line. They want to get you in and out. And so what's nice is we reduced length of stay, but I think by about a day and a half. So save them, over their new hospitals, so something like $30 million a year. But so huge labor savings. Because now you have less people on staff supporting all those folks. That went into a predictive labor. So now they can say, based on the length of stay, how many people would be in beds, how many people do we need staffed, and all the different roles. But it also improves the health outcomes, because one of the biggest issues in the hospitals is secondary infection. And so you get people in and out of the hospital quicker, you're saving lives.
Yeah.
So I love this story, and it's why it was a big public case study, because it reduced cost and saved lives. Like, there's no better justification for technology. So I think the short answer is yes, they're using AI, but not to like define treatment.
Right.
Maybe to define an intervention to accelerate a treatment plan, but not to say, hey, this is what I think the person has. Now, there's other cases, and I'll make it quick, but we did for another large healthcare system based on a bunch of data. So sepsis is an example of kind of these secondary issues that can happen when you're in a hospital. We were actually able to predict sepsis outbreaks with, I forget what the accuracy was, but this healthcare institution had worked for 2 years to build a model. And we came in there with some more advanced like analytics capabilities, and within 2 weeks came up with an accurate model for predicting sepsis outbreaks.
Wow.
So there's definitely ways that you can start to see AI, and that's just healthcare.
That's one of the trends you were saying, also going back to looking at actually being able to analyze the analytics, because everyone's collecting all this data all the time. And a lot of time they just don't understand how to really analyze the information itself.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I think that's why I talked about AI-enabled apps. It's one thing to build reports, and we all know. We build a ton of reports, and I have a library of hundreds of different reports for everything I'd ever need to know. But it's like a one-off activity. I have to think, okay, well, wait, I want to learn about this. I'm going to go off and hunt this data down. Whereas the AI-enabled apps, that's what was so great about that healthcare example, is you're in there and you've got a tablet and you're asking questions, and based on those models, it's actually giving you different questions to ask. Right? So you can't avoid, this sounds scary, you can't avoid the AI in that case, right? It's there in an integrated experience. I think cognitive services is another one, and that's more easy for people to see. It's the chatbots, right? It's using visual, scanning. We do a lot within, say, logistics and manufacturing and supply, where we can use cameras to actually detect, inventory. We have a famous case study with, I'll call them a adult beverage manufacturer. But they go and they restock your local convenience stores. And so we built an app on their cell phone. So before they'd actually have to go in and count the supplies, they'd open up the fridges and count. They're in the store an average 10 minutes and they'd spend like 9.5 minutes counting. So we built an app where they can literally just scan the door, and it looks and it picks out all the bottles, and it can actually do the depth and everything.
Wow.
It takes them like 3 minutes to do the scan now. And they can spend the other 7 minutes chatting with the store manager, upselling all their beverages, right? So that's a much more tangible. That was actually a pretty easy app to write, right? Because a lot of these frameworks already exist. So I think on both ends, you can see it on the really big, machine learning AI enabled apps, as well as just kind of simple cognitive services.
Pretty cool.
Yeah. That was a fun client. They had a beer garage with little robots that would drive beers around to your desk.
So they're into technology.
Yeah.
Matt, so going back to what we were talking about with the short-term and long-term goals. So we talked about like within the next 12 months, and we talked about the 3 years. Now, the immediate need is still focused on that remote aspect. So I wanted to talk a little bit about that hybrid and how it's really impacting outcomes and how are we then. I guess what I'm trying to say is how are businesses really incorporating all that technology into the hybrid model then?
You mean like the hybrid work model?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think that you got to meet employees or teammates or customers wherever they are. And so, I know a lot of companies are getting back to the office, not 5 days a week or even 3 days a week, like a lot originally talked about, but for events, right, to drive collaboration and drive sense of community. The last stat I'll mention, because I know we're running short on from the ITR, is really the stresses around talent management. And so employee attrition and gaps in skill set are like at the top of when you ask executives and companies, like, what's the thing that keeps them up at night? It's talent right now, getting people to do the work. And so I think there's just this realization across the industry that you have to meet people where they need to be to get their jobs done. And for some people, that means a fully remote work from home. For a lot of people, though, it means letting them kind of come back safely and be part of something again. Especially in the tech space, I think we're used to innovating. We're used to there's like, if you've ever been to some of the big hyperscale like partner or companies like the Googles, the Microsofts, the Amazons, there's coffee carts, there's meals, there's all these added services in the offices. I don't know if we're ever going to get back to that fully, but that did create a sense of community that kept people there. And so, I think people are realizing, one, you've got to create alternatives so that you can come in or work remote, and there's technology that supports that. I think people realize that you have to have benefits and compensation to keep people attracted, right? That's one of the biggest issues we see right now. And then you just have to keep people engaged. I think one of the things that I love about consulting, and I think the data shows here, is that like people want to work on cool stuff that has impact, right? They want to feel like they've accomplished something, that they're doing something for the greater good. And so I think if we can help transform organizations, create like the story I talked about, have real significant social impact, through the use of cool technology, and you pay people well and you treat them well, then that's you really need to do all of it to keep people engaged and support this new hybrid workplace.
Now, I mean, there's been a lot of talk about IT staffing shortages, right? Mm-hmm. And this is something that was highlighted in the report also, correct?
Yeah. And I mean, it's interesting depending on the industry. I think some industries, there's literally just like, people have left the workforce, and they may not come back, or they've moved on to different industries. I think within tech, it's actually just that there's such increased demand. I don't know how many people have left tech. I'm sure some, but there's probably tons of people still getting into it. It's just that, if you're kind of a legacy, how to say this properly, but like, let's say you are a manufacturing company, right? Mm-hmm. And you decide that, hey, I need to transform my business through the use of data science and modeling. Like, good luck hiring 6 data scientists, right? That's just not right. So I think you just have to be smart. This is where like a company like Insight, we can hire them because we can always keep them focused on the next thing, right? Mm-hmm. Keep them stimulated, keep them engaged. I mean, I think you just have to find that right balance between, what type of company you're going to be. Are you going to be a tech company, right? Are you a kind of non-technical, an analog company? You're a logistics company, a shipping company, right? Like maybe that's not the best investment to build up a multi-100-person IT team. It's going to be tough to keep those people. So you got to find the right balance between where do you go external, versus what do you try to build in-house.
Right. Well, do you see most of the shortages? Where do you see the shortages in staff? Is it like help desk people? Is it like network people? Is it,
everything?
Everything.
No, I think it's really, what the bigger issue I see is not like shortages. It's just turnover, right? And actually, we're doing pretty well. Our turnover is higher than normal, but quite a bit lower than the industry. But every time there's turnover, that's onboarding, it's training, it's right. Ramping people up, and then somebody leaves, and there's kind of impact from that. So I think it's funny. There's this like rotating wheel of people right now, always kind of looking for the next thing. We're trying to head that off, but that's why I said you got to give people the right value prop. You got to pay them well. You got to give them the right benefits and give them the right opportunity. Because I think if anything, there's more churn than there is gap right now. At least in technology. I think other industries, there's definitely.
And I'm assuming that has to do with a lot of, that camaraderie that you were talking about earlier, like in the office and the culture, without, it's a little bit harder when things are remote to have.
Yeah, absolutely. And so people feel less of an attachment to their colleagues in the company. And so they'll go for any raise that they can find, right? Because what else is there? And so I think you've got to combat that on two fronts. You have to make sure that you're paying them well so they don't look around, but then you've got to give them the reason to feel attached to the organization.
Another thing you mentioned before, and I do want to eventually close up with kind of your focus for 2022, but I want to go back to security for a second because I think it's really important. And as the results showed, this was very important now and then and in the future. So, what are we seeing there in terms of security?
So I think, now your fear is not just like business impact. You don't want to be in the news. You don't want to be that next company that's in the news, right? You think it's hard to hire people now, right? Imagine if you were plastered all over the news, how hard it'll be then. And so I think it's, the ransomware stuff that you're hearing about. I mean, there's so many bad actors out there, and the technology has gotten, it's hard to keep up. And so, what I find is people are putting their trust in established brands and frameworks for security, right? Like there's, every organization cannot have a world-class CISO that's just always out there looking for the next, potential attack vector. And so you've got to place your bets on frameworks. You've got to place your bets on, secure networks, secure application frameworks, as well as, training and best practices. If you actually look at a lot of the ransomware stuff, it's not that, yes, there might be some lax policies at some organizations, but it's a contractor came in and shared their credentials and got access to a database that they shouldn't have had access to, or somebody, maybe some network traffic wasn't encrypted and somebody was able to sniff the traffic and grab credit cards off of it. So a lot of that is just organizational change, making people aware. And as much as it pains me, I just had to go through every year, we have to go through our security training, right? Like as an organization, everybody, not just the technology folks, everybody in an organization has to go through it. And it's just like what to look for if you get an email, what to think about when you onboard a new employee or a contractor. And so I think the technology is the stuff I like to focus on, but the reality is that there's organizational change management that goes into it because that's where most of the security issues come from.
All right. So on that note, why don't you tell us what businesses should be really thinking about when it comes to their IT budgets in 2022?
So in 2022, hopefully by this point, they've created the infrastructure to support a remote workplace. If not, like that should be on top of it.
Number one.
If you haven't done that, securely, right? Everything, just put securely on everything. Right? And so I think that if you look at all the other major, like over the last couple of decades, whether it was the Great Recession in kind of 2009, 2010, or the tech bubble or the housing bubble in 2004, there were these periods of great disruption caused by tremendous levels of growth, right? And so within those periods of growth, the companies that were innovating, the companies that were investing in the next thing were the ones that succeeded and benefited from that growth. And the ones that didn't invest, that were still kind of recovering from whatever that traumatic event was, were the ones that failed. And so we're kind of at that point where you can see the recovery. We're not quite there. You get a little bit of time, but the time is measured in months or maybe quarters, not years. And so if you're not thinking about either how you're going to disrupt your market or how somebody else is going to disrupt it for you, and you need to stay ahead of them, then you might do okay in 2022, but by the time 2023 and 4 come along, you're going to see your market share erode. You're going to see, kind of non-traditional competitors come into your space. So I think the recommendation is just if you're not thinking about innovation now, by the time you do think about it, it'll be too late.
Well, thank you so much, Matt. Would you do us a favor and tell us where we can find the report or where we can learn more?
Yeah, you can definitely just go to insight.com, that's insight.com, and there'll be a link right at the beginning. We just launched it. It might be there'll probably be some stats on there, and then you can click through to get the full download. But great information. Definitely recommend everybody read it.
Awesome. Brian, you got anything else for Matt?
No. Yeah, I'm good. I'm good. Matt, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much. Have a good year. Have a good 2022.
Thanks both. Yes, looking forward to turning the page.
There we go.
Yeah.
Thanks again.